Having settled with his accuser, Prince Andrew apparently owes Virginia Giuffre £12 million. And that's not including what will be extortionate legal fees. The obvious question this all poses is where Andrew is going to find that sort of cash. The prince doesn't have a job, and his personal wealth is thought to be no more than £10 million. The Telegraph has suggested the Queen is to help pay for £12 million Prince Andrew settlement. And they report the Queen has already privately funded the Duke's legal fight to the tune of millions of pounds and will now partly fund the settlement in order to allow her son and the entire royal family to draw a line under the case that had threatened to overshadow her Platinum Jubilee year. Of course, keeping the focus on what matters, which is the Platinum Jubilee year. That's the real priority here. Apparently, Andrew has 30 days to pay up. So this should all be resolved reasonably quickly. Speaking on the Jeremy Vine show this morning, Gemma Forte said this.
Whole thing is so unpalatable. I think it's really, really important that taxpayers feel that we are not funding this, we need to know. Especially at the moment. Times are hard, cost of living crisis. We don't want to be letting this man off the hook with our taxpayers' money.
Now, apparently it is all coming from the Queen. It's
very blurred, isn't it? It's blurred. And I think there are probably areas of her financial purse that you can argue is her private money. She does. So if it comes from that, fine.
So if it comes from that, fine. To be fair to the commentator there, she did recognise that sort of line between public and private is difficult to sort of assess, to ascertain. We're going to talk about those ambiguities. It's worth saying Labour have also made a similar request. They've asked for guarantees that no taxpayer money will be used to fund Andrew's settlement. As I've said, this all raises the question, what does it mean to say that the Queen has private money as opposed to public wealth? To break it down, some parts of what we think of as belonging to the Queen is explicitly owned by the state. That includes the Crown Estate, which manages various properties and assets and properties like Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle. But the Queen also has a private fortune. In 2015, the Sunday Times Rich List estimated her personal wealth to be some £340 million. She also gets a private income from her Duchy of Lancaster estate, which manages her wealth, investments and land. In 2020, those generated £23 million in profit. It's reported this will likely be the source of any money passed on to Andrew. So where does the extraordinary so-called private wealth managed by the Duchy of Lancaster estate come from? And can it really be considered private? Well, it's difficult to say because the details of most of the Queen's financial affairs are shrouded in secrecy. In the early 1970s, the Tory government under Edward Heath drafted legislation that would make company shareholdings more transparent. But the Queen used her power as head of state to lobby the government into changing the law. The Queen learned about the new law by using what's called Queen's consent, a rule that means the government must inform the Queen if any new legislation might affect her. Her private solicitor approached the government on her behalf. A civil servant named C.M. Drucker made a note of that meeting with her lawyer. As I had recalled, he, or rather I think his clients, are quite as concerned over the risk of disclosure to directors of a company as to shareholders and the general public. He justifies this not only because of the risk of inadvertent or indiscreet leaking to other people, but more basically because disclosure to any person would be embarrassing. In response to this representation, and to save the Queen the embarrassment of financial transparency, the government changed the bill by inserting a secrecy clause, which was immediately applied to one organisation, a shell company, which held all the Queen's investments. And there's another legal loophole that indicates the Queen's riches are not just a normal private portfolio. Until 1992, the Queen paid no tax on her private profits, no income tax, no capital gains tax, and no inheritance tax. That was because, as the sovereign, she was legally exempt from all tax. And the Queen still has no obligation to pay tax. In 1992, she signed a memorandum of understanding with the government agreeing to voluntarily pay an annual amount to HMRC as compensation for her income tax exempt status, but she is still exempt from the rest of the taxes we pay. Significantly, for someone whose wealth is principally hereditary, she is still exempt from inheritance tax. That meant when the Queen Mother died in 2002, her daughter inherited her £70 million estate and paid not a penny of tax on it. It gets even grubbier because even with all of these privileges, which don't apply to anyone else, the Queen still has a penchant for tucking her money away in secretive offshore vehicles. In 2017, the leaked Paradise Papers showed that the Queen had millions of pounds of her personal wealth in funds in the Cayman Islands and Bermuda. One of the companies that the Queen invested in via that fund was Bright House, an exploitative rent-to-own company that charged inflated prices for ordinary goods to people who couldn't afford them. So, clearly, much if not all of the Queen's money has been amassed, not by effort, but by tax-free inheritance and profits and by special personal financial arrangements with the government made because she is head of state. That the details of her wealth remain secret is an outrage, but it's probably necessary to keep the public calm, especially when it's used to pay off the victims of her son's paedophile friends.
When it comes to the head of state, those boundaries between public and private money is incredibly porous. I mean, we could make that argument about most rich people, to be honest, because most of them do get handouts and exemptions and subsidies from the state. But in the case of the monarchy, it is pretty exceptional. Like, it is pretty, you can't deny how porous those boundaries are. But this is all, this is very shocking when you consider that the monarchy is an active part of our state. Even, amongst people who aren't massive fans of the monarchy, there's a tendency there to kind of say, well, this is just a symbolic relic. It's just the power is only symbolic when it comes to the monarchy. And whilst the monarchy might not have explicit political power, it has a huge amount of financial and economic power. And it is an active part of that dynamic in our state. The monarchy in this country is one of the biggest landowners in the world. Like, that's not a symbolic form of power. Land ownership is about as material as power can actually get. And I think that this mysticism and the opacity that it happens under the guise of tradition, it means that as the public, we are denied access to even the most basic forms of transparency when it comes to how this integral part of our government, of our state, operates. And yet we're so encouraged to not think of it like that. In fact, talking about it in those terms is almost stigmatized. And so we end up with this scenario which you outlined, that vast swathes of public money, or money that is at least very much, you can't exactly say it isn't public money, even if it's not coming directly from the taxpayer. Vast amounts of that money is used in ways that we have absolutely no access to knowing or understanding. And it's also really important to point out here that it's not just the money of the British public. That's not the only public money this is. This is also the money of the global public, because let's not forget, much of the monarchy's wealth is colonial wealth as well. And so vast amounts of money are used in ways that I don't even think the staunchest monarchists would agree is a good way or a honorable way to use this money, particularly, and it obviously hits differently when you have, the biggest cost of living crisis in decades, where people are having their energy bills tripled almost overnight. And yet we are seeing £12 million going towards making sure that one man avoids his day in court. And that is down to the fact that the kind of narratives, the kind of woolly, quaint narratives that we talk about the monarchy, that we use to talk about the monarchy, conceals the fact that they are a significant financial and economic dimension of our state, and therefore they should be subject to public scrutiny in the way that all other parts of the state should also be subject to.